What is up, everybody? Happy Halloween and welcome back to 31 on 31. This year titled Outbreak Protocol. If this is your first time joining us for a 31 on 31, this is a video series, an annual video series that some friends and I started on Halloween of 2018. And we've carried on the tradition where every single Halloween we pick a theme and then we pick 31 horror films that fit that theme and rank them together from worst to best. But all throughout the day, you have been seeing videos drop from all of my fellow members of Autopstream, including Charles from Williscredia, Rudy from Gen X Reviews, Sean from Sean Chandler Talks About, and our special guest, Adam from Adam Does Movies. And so once you're done getting through my ranking, I highly encourage you and ask you to please go and check out all of their videos, see how their rankings and their styles of editing and their little short films and sense of humors differ greatly from mine. The links to all of their videos will be down in the video description below. And be sure to hit that subscribe button because here in a couple of weeks, we're all going to reconvene on a live stream, which we call the debrief, where we compile all of our different lists, we average out all the numbers and come up with a master ranking of these 31 movies. And then we get into a bunch of loud arguments about why certain movies are ranked higher than others and our massive differences of opinions. It's a lot of fun. Be sure you don't miss it. But yeah, this year is titled Outbreak Protocol, and we're tackling zombie films as well as viral films, infected films, biohazard films, what other little mini subgenre of zombie films you want to have in there. It would be nice and clean to just call it 31 on 31 zombies, but I know you 28 Days Later fans get a little finicky about fucking semantics, don't you? And so we've gathered 31 different films that fit the zombie subgenre in any way. So you've got, of course, got Romero films in there. We've got Reanimator, Zombieland, Return of the Living Dead. We got the 28 Days Later trilogy. We even got Scooby-Doo showing up for a fun little surprise in here. So sit back, relax, grab something meaty to chew on. Because it's about to get rowdy up in here. Coming in at number 31, my least favorite of the slate of films that we have this year is going to be Return of the Living Dead Part 2. Now, I will say, even though this is my 31, this movie wasn't anywhere near as bad and irredeemable as a lot of people have made it out to be. This was a first-time watch for me, of which there was like 5 on this list. I've seen the original Return of the Living Dead. I've actually seen the third one a couple of times, and this was the one that I always heard was just absolute irredeemable trash, that it was like the worst thing that could have possibly come after the Return of the Living Dead debut. And so I actually watched this last night. It was the last film that I watched for this list. And while, yeah, it certainly wasn't good, it was very odd to find that they had the same exact cast. I mean, you got Tom Matthews and people coming up, but aren't the exact same characters from the first film. So it was almost like they took like an anthology sequel type approach, which was very confusing. But what was really well done in the first film, which is the sense of humor, that punk aesthetic and everything that we love it for, here, it kind of felt like a lot of that was an afterthought. Like they just kind of wanted to recycle some of the same jokes. They wanted to have their own different version of Tar Man, which doesn't look anywhere near as good. You wanted to have zombies being able to speak and give their own versions of the send more paramedics line. It literally feels like somebody doing like a parody or a ripoff of the first film, but just nothing about it is as good or as entertaining or as stand out about that first film. So, not a good movie, but not one that I absolutely hated watching. It was just like, okay, that exists. Coming in at number 30 for me was another first-time watch, and it's called Zombie Flesh Eaters. I think this is also called Zombie 2 overseas. It's kind of a weird story. So this is essentially the Fulci pseudo-sequel to Romero's Dawn of the Dead. It's not an official sequel. I don't exactly know the story on what happened there, if there was a rights issue or if there was a falling out, but this was created to be intended to be the follow-up to Romero's Dawn of the Dead. And obviously, if you've seen the film, it really has nothing in comparison to that except for just having some zombies. And this was one that I've always been curious about because it's one of those covers that I've always recognized. And there's like a couple of them in this list that I'll say that for, passing the VHS tape in the video stores back in the 90s. I, of course, always knew about the eye gouge scene, which this movie is infamous for, as well as the shark attack scene where you have a zombie, a dude in makeup underwater fighting an actual shark. And that's really the standout piece of this movie, is having some of those video nasties, like shock value moments. That's what the movie is known for. It was quite literally a film that was like banned in a lot of regions because of the extreme level of violence, at least what they interpreted it as at the time of release. You know, the eye gouge scene being the number one, and there's a few other scenes in here that are certainly gnarly. And I think the practical effects here are pretty good, not just on the zombie effects, but of course during those gore scenes. Everything outside of that, though, bored the fuck out of me. Like, this movie could not hold my attention to save my life. You know, I was really interested in what exactly this was going to be, if there was going to actually be some kind of ties, character-wise, story-wise, tonality-wise, to Dawn of the Dead that was going to be like these fun little Easter eggs. No, it's just an island zombie film, because this is an Italian horror film and they try to do this English overdubbing, which was just not matched up very well. So it made for a very jarring visual experience to try to get into this story and these characters when every single thing that's coming out of their mouth is not matching their face. And then just the style of the film really had just a slow build to it. It didn't really feel like there was this interesting story, some kind of a conflict that we're really invested in, no characters that I really got invested in. It was really just sitting there waiting for the next gore scene, waiting for a zombie to fight a shark. And once the luster of that wore off, it's a movie that I remember almost nothing about, even though I watched it less than a week ago. God damn, this fucking thing stings. I didn't have any more sutures. God, I got a pain right here. Not here, not here so much, but right here. Coming in at number 29 is probably the film that a lot of people expected to be my 31, and it wasn't far off, and that's Pet Sematary 2. This is the definition of a love-or-hate film. As you guys know, I love the original Pet Sematary. It is on this list. It is significantly higher on this list. And this sequel has just never been my thing. Now, why it is not 31 or 30 is because I do think that there is some so bad that it's good entertainment to be had. This is a film that absolutely goes for it. You know, it's something that is taking its own direction from the source material, and you have Mary Lambert returning as a director from the first film who has a very weird off-kilter style to her that I think serves the original very well. Doesn't serve this one so well. Also did Halloween Town, fun fact. But this is very much like a horror comedy take on the Pet Sematary lore, which I just don't really like. What really draws me into the story and the world of Pet Sematary is that gut-wrenching psychological drama of having a loved one be dead and that moral dilemma of, do I bring them back and have this evil non-human version of them, or do I allow them to rest? And this movie kind of turns that into a bit of a crazy zany joke, and I just don't really think that it lands. You got Clancy Brown in here who's absolutely going for it. Like, he's chewing up the scenery quite literally every single time he's on screen. I love young Edward Furlong. You know, T2 has carried that guy a long way, where even if he's in a bad movie, I'm like, hey, John Connor, I love you. But it's just a fucking weird movie, man. Like, this is one that I was actually really excited to finally check out about, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago for the first time. This was one that my dad growing up always told me, yeah, that movie sucks, don't bother with it. And when I used to always be beholden to dad's opinions, I was like, I ain't bothering, that movie sucks, dad said so. And then eventually I heard so many people, once I started joining the horror community online and doing YouTube, saying, oh man, Pet Sematary 2 is one of my favorites. I was really interested to see if I was going to differ from my father's opinion. Well, needless to say, Daddy was right. Now, the next 2 movies on this list, I think, are going to be a little bit of a hot take, but you guys know that have watched me for a while, I'm not a found footage guy. Like, I think that the 2 movies I'm about to talk about are really well done. Oh boy, actually, it's the next 3 movies. Oh, you guys are going to hurt me in the comments. The next 3 movies that I'm going to talk about, I think, are well done versions of found footage, but they're still movies that I just can't really get into. They're movies I would never have the desire to rewatch. Look, this is just a me thing. This is my own personal taste, which should be the reason why you're watching this video, is to see how my tastes differ from yours, not to hear your list regurgitated back at you, right? Right? And so coming in at 28 for me is going to be Wreck. Or Record. How the fuck do you say the title of this movie, by the way? So Wreck is a found footage film where essentially you're following this news reporter as she is doing this report on these firefighters inside of this firehouse, and she's going out on a run on this little emergency call, and it turns out to be basically like an infection outbreak where she ends up in this apartment high-rise, and then somebody ends up being infected, which slowly spreads to all the other residents, and the government is literally quarantining this building, not letting them out, and they're essentially descending into hell. Like, the longer they're in this building, the worse that it gets, all the way up to the end of the film where they essentially encounter what was Patient Zero. And I think for a found footage experience, this is one of the better done ones. As I said, it's just the type of film that I don't really enjoy watching. I don't enjoy the style of found footage. It's just not for me. So added in with the fact that I had already seen Quarantine years ago, which of course is going to taint my experience of this a little bit, because despite being a first time watch, it's not really a first time watch. So I kind of knew all the plot points. I kind of knew all the surprises that are going to be around every corner. I knew the final shot of the film. And, is that fair to Rec? Maybe not, but that's just the way that it goes. We all have times like that where you watch a shot-for-shot remake first and don't even realize it's a shot-for-shot remake. I certainly didn't. And then it kind of taints your experience if you go back and watch the original, because it's quite literally 90% the same experience. Even the same thing with remakes. If you watch a modern remake, sometimes you can't fully appreciate the older version because all of the plot points have kind of already been ingrained in your mind with the newer version. So you can maybe attribute 1 or 2 slots to Rec being in 28 to that. Maybe it would have been 26 if I had saw it first, but regardless, just not a found footage guy. Just please accept me for who I am. Coming in right above that at 27 is Quarantine. So this one I do prefer slightly for 2 very basic reasons that hopefully you'll understand. One, I saw this one first, and so I had a decent time with this one back in the 2000s when it came out. Still didn't really love it, but I was like, okay, that's one of the better found footage movies that I've seen. There were some creepy moments. That ending was pretty cool. And I love Jennifer Carpenter. Like, I'm a Deborah Morgan stan. I'm sorry. That's going to earn her at least a spot. Sue me. Coming in at 26 is another first-time watch for me, and this is the one that I was probably most intrigued to check out on this list, specifically because of the amount of hype that my buddy Charles gave it. He has been talking up this movie for years, and he's not the only one. I've seen plenty of people talk about it, but he's the one who has brought up this movie so many times as like this amazing example of the zombie subgenre, this amazing example of found footage films, and that's One Cut of the Dead. Now, let me say clearly, this is a movie that might go up this list in time if I ever have the desire to rewatch it. This is a movie that is quite literally very cheeky in the way that it is assembled, because it kind of wants you to have a miserable experience in the first half just to subvert everything that you thought in the first half in the second half. And I think that that works for the film as well as works against it. But this is a Japanese satirical semi-found footage film where essentially you have this filmmaker who is shooting like a TV special, like an hour-long little thing of this zombie outbreak with like no budget and almost nobody of talent with him. He's put in this impossible task where he has to basically make lemonade out of some really shit lemons. And this is going to get into spoilers, so if you've never seen One Cut of the Dead, you want to check it out, skip to the next movie in this list, go check it out and come back and revisit this segment. But essentially the trick of the film is that you start off for like the first 30, 40 minutes of the film watching this zombie movie, this zombie outbreak story, as if it's like found footage. And it's fucking awful. Like, the acting is awful. The effects are awful. It is so cheaply done. Like 35, 40 minutes I'm sitting here and I'm resisting every urge to text Charles and be like, dude, fuck you again. Son of a bitch makes me watch Titan last year, and now you hit me with this shit. Brian, come back. I'm sorry for everything I ever said to you. Charles, your torch has been snuffed. The tribe has spoken. Get the fuck out. But then it reverses in time and shows everything before this little zombie outbreak, and it turns out that this guy is just making a film with these impossible tasks. And so essentially you like step a little bit back with the camera crew, and now you're filming the experience of this guy actually making this found footage thing with absolutely no money, no talent, and all the stakes against him. And it kind of got a little bit fun because then you're seeing why it was so terrible, and it's all kind of shot in one take, at least the first part of it. So you're seeing how they were able to film that. Like, creativity wise, this thing is one of the more interesting entries in this 31. And as I said, if I watch the film again, kind of knowing the trick of the film and knowing what tricks it has up its sleeve, maybe I can get through that first 35, 40 minutes a lot easier. I can have a lot more fun with it. But I was so miserable in the first half. No matter how much interest, no matter how much of a smile I got in the second half, I still felt like it was a very mixed experience because it's like you have to sit through so much misery to finally get to the good creative stuff. So despite it being this low on the list, this is not one that I would argue tooth and nail when we go to the debrief. I'm sure Charles is going to have it in his top 3, and it's not going to turn into a Brian versus Charles moment. I'm going to be like, hey, I get it. It's interesting. I get it. Coming in at number 25, we have Zack Snyder's Army of the Dead. And, this is a film that I thought was okay, but it was a massive disappointment because you have Zack Snyder, who just got done with all of the DC Warner Brothers nonsense and is making his first film outside of the Batman v Superman and Justice League debacle, which is one set of hype and excitement if you're a fan of Zack Snyder, but also He's the guy that made the Dawn of the Dead remake in 2003, 2004 that I'm a massive fan of. That will also be much higher on this list. And so fans of Dawn of the Dead are like, holy shit, is he about to do it again? Is this like a pseudo sequel? Like, what the fuck is this about to be? It's going to kick ass. And it didn't. It didn't. It's got some cool ideas in it. It's got some cool gore effects. There's some of the actors and characters that I like Dave Bautista. The actual like kickoff premise of the movie I think is really cool, where you have these mercenaries that are sent into a zombie-infested Las Vegas to essentially pull off a heist, get a bunch of money, and get the fuck out of there before they turn into beef stew. And that's a really cool idea for a small film. But clearly at this point, Zack Snyder has just forgotten how to make small films. Everything that he has to do has to be epic in size, epic in runtime, epic in scale. And I just don't feel like all of those sensibilities of Zack Snyder's more recent filmmaking really did this movie any favors. It's like, what, 2.5 hours long? It should have easily been under 2 hours. There's so many different characters and subplots that don't need to be there. And it really relies too much on cliches of the genre that a lot of us don't even like Batista's daughter being this fucking non-listening pain in the ass that gets so many people killed, you bitch. Sorry, I'm okay. You have these alpha zombies that, are running around on like horses and shit. You've got zombie tigers, like cool little versions of evolved viruses. That's always one of the things about more modern zombie films that I like seeing, is like, how are they going to evolve the virus in a way that we have not seen before? What is their version of an alpha? What is their version of other things besides humans being infected? So some of that style is cool here, but the overall package just really feels overstuffed and bloated and just way too big for what the concept needed to be. And so as somebody who is a self-professed Zack Snyder fan, I really hope at some point that he's able to kind of be a little more self-aware at some of the more recent criticisms, especially of the movies that he writes as well as directs, and is able to go back to something like the glory days of the original Dawn of the Dead remake, as well as things like 300. Like, I crave that type of movie from Zack Snyder. This should have been it, but it wasn't. Coming in at number 24 is another first-time watch for me. This might be the last one, I'm not sure. There was quite a few first-time watches, wasn't there? I lied, I said there was like 4. And this is George Romero's The Crazies. Now, I have to be honest to kind of prime you for where some of this list is going to go. I've never been a crazy Romero fan. Now, there's a lot of things that I appreciate about his movies, his style, certainly a pioneer, can't take any of that away from him. I'll elaborate a lot more on that when I get to some of those movies, but I've just never really been as enamored with Romero as some people. Like, he's not on my Mount Rushmore with people like John Carpenter. That's just my own personal taste. But The Crazies was one that I was curious to check out because I have seen the remake years before this one. So yeah, we're going to have another quarantine situation. Sorry. But given that side of the story that I've experienced, and assuming that this is not too far of a cry from the remake version, I know that there's no zombies in this movie. It's just about this chemical weapon that has been let out into this town and people starting to kind of lose their minds and become hyper violent. And I know especially Romero is known possibly most for his biting, no pun intended, social commentary and political commentary. And so I was really curious to check this one out and see how it differs from his more typical zombie fare that I've certainly seen before. And I have to say, I think of all of the Romero films that I have seen, this is actually the one where I find his social commentary to be most relevant and to be most well done. I've never really found some of the other films that are held up more for his allegories and his commentary to be quite as interesting as some give it credit to be. But The Crazies, both in this 70s film as well as the 2000s film, it's as relevant today as it's ever been. Essentially, it's a film about, who are the crazies? Is it the townsfolk who are starting to lose their minds and be violent? Is it the other townsfolk who are starting to slowly kind of lose their humanity because of the hysteria and the chaos of this situation? Is it the government who's coming in and just having an absolute, just immoral, laying waste to everybody type attitude? We got to contain this for the greater good, so fuck all of you, you're going to die. Which all kind of boils down to this central premise, this central commentary of, should you trust your government? Should you really start to suspect certain nefarious motives from your government and from your leaders? Should you ask a lot of questions, and should you certainly fight back when you don't agree or when you smell something rotten in Denmark with what the government is doing? That's essentially what this movie is about, with like this infected type of premise painted around it. And I think it's a concept that's pretty timeless. I think it's something that, especially in today's just absolute toxic political climate, like a movie like this is certainly something that is just as relevant today as it was in the 70s, as I've already said. Now, this is an older film. It's certainly a slower film, in comparison to the one that I'm used to, at least. I'm sure for the day it was pretty intense. The characters and the acting are fine. I've never found Romero to be the best at getting like really great performances out of his actors. But for what it is, for a film that I've never seen before, I was actually kind of surprised at how much I got out of it. I was expecting this one to maybe be a bit of a chore to get through, and it wasn't. I found it to be pretty interesting. Show must go on. Number 23 is going to be Return of the Living Dead Part 3. Now, this is a film that kind of has a little special place in my heart. There's about 3 or 4 films that I have this distinct memory of walking through the horror section of Family Video and always looking at this VHS cover and going, that looks like that could be a badass movie. And then for whatever reason, never renting it. Night of the Demons 2 is one I always remember with the little skull lollipop, and Return of the Living Dead Part 3 is the other one. Maybe I just got a thing for like fucked up zombie chicks. Is that a kink out there? And so this is a movie that, despite being called Return of the Living Dead Part 3, really has nothing to do with the other two, but I guess that's kind of a trend that the second one started, because that really had nothing to do with the first film. Like, I don't know, it's a weird trilogy, but this one is essentially taking the trioxin, and that's the only thing that carries over, and you got this military dad who's trying to utilize this trioxin to create, like, bioweapons, like reanimate the dead to be used in warfare, and his rebellious son and even more rebellious girlfriend, Julie, end up breaking into this little bio lab because she gets into a motorcycle accident and dies, and he reanimates her with this trioxin. So the whole movie is essentially about her slowly kind of turning into this flesh-eating undead person. You know, she doesn't immediately zombify, but she's hungry for flesh. She's always in pain. And the way that she's able to kind of mitigate the hunger is by causing more physical pain to herself. And so eventually you get like this transformation scene where she's sticking shards of glass and she's like totally doing this fucking sadomasochistic, like Hellraiser type shit where she's putting a chain through slits in her neck and she's got like these little talons that she's like welded to her fingers. She looks fucking badass. Like, for all the faults that this movie has, and there's a plenty of them, I think Julie is one of the coolest and most iconic looking zombie characters of all time. And that's carrying this movie probably about 2 or 3 spots higher on this list, just for me personally. This is a movie that I think you can have some so bad that it's good fun with it. You know, it kind of has some of the tone of the Return of the Living Dead franchise, while it being just a little bit darker, not quite so overtly comedic and goofy. There's definitely a little bit more of a gnarlier edge to the look of the zombies here. You got one of them that's literally wearing nothing but like a leather cock sock, which is a little bit of a weird look. The biggest thing that I could not stand about this film, which rewatching it, I didn't even remember this was a thing, is the music in this movie is absolute dog shit. It literally sounds like a forgotten Goosebumps episode that they tried to bury because the music was so bad. Like, it's just so cheap, so like early 90s that every time the music would ramp up, like I would laugh, and not in a good way. This is a film also where the acting, it's not great. Like, the actress who plays Julie, I like her. I really enjoyed her in that show Nikita. She was one of the main villains there. But everybody else, especially the main kid, you know, the boyfriend of Julie, not so great. A lot of the people that they interact with in the military and these other like punks, you know, these gang members in it, not that great. So it's a movie that you either have to embrace for its faults, or you're going to think it's absolutely dreadful. And I'm not going to be surprised if a number of my cohorts have this much lower than I do. So Return of the Living Dead Part 3, it's okay, but I'll always have a little bit of love for it for that VHS cover. Number 22, one of, if not the biggest disappointment of 2025 so far, and unfortunately was also the film that hyped me up to actually want to make zombies and infected movies the theme of this year's 31 on 31, and that's 28 Years Later. Now, I do think this is a movie that, depending on how the next 2 films in this trilogy go, you know, we're getting Bone Temple here in January. I don't know what the status of the third film is, The overall trilogy's quality could either send this higher in the list or it could potentially even send it lower. But this was my most anticipated film of this year. I love 28 Days Later. I've always been a much bigger fan of 28 Weeks Later than it seems most other people have been. And when they finally announced that they were going back and doing this third film that we've all been waiting for a very long time, to the point where it was supposed to be 28 months later, and it's been so long that they had to say 28 years later, I was over the moon. And the trailers looked incredible. The cast was awesome. The fact that we're getting Alex Garland back as a writer and Danny Boyle back as the director, who was the creative team that made the first film, gave it a lot of promise. And then I watched the film and I went, yeah, that was weird.
That's a big cock.
Now, don't get me wrong. It's beautifully shot. There was a lot of press going out about these iPhone camera rigs that they shot the movie with, which I thought was brilliant because it's utilizing modern technology in a way that kind of has the aesthetic somewhat of the first film, where it feels very indie and it feels a little bit low res and grainy, even though iPhones are like basically 4K. There was just ways that they were able to make it look like this pristine modern picture while having some of that aesthetic that those of us that enjoy the first film kind of wanted a bit back. It has that grit to it. I think the acting is great all the way around. I think that there are some really interesting characters here that I'm fascinated to see how they're developed out, especially Ralph Fiennes' character as this doctor. There's some gnarly gore, like literally heads and like almost like Predator, like the spinal cords being torn out of people. But then you have some really bizarre stuff going on here. You have some really weird editing choices, splicing in like these old, Knights of the Round Table type movies with like, archers and shit. I don't know what exact type of metaphor or visual storytelling they were going for with that. You have the whole thing with what are they called? The Jimmies or whatever that we're going to see be much bigger of a piece in the second film, which I'm very concerned about, where the last 5 minutes of the movie literally ends almost like a Power Rangers episode. You have the whole thing that has slowly been revealed afterwards, who's a character I've never heard of in my life, a guy that I have no knowledge of, but this was supposed to be like a movie that is somewhat unpacking society and the way that they use entertainment for children. And then you have the guy, Jimmy Savile, who is quite literally the inspiration for the Jimmies. And yeah, I don't know. It was just a very bizarre, peculiar choice. Was it bold? Yes. Was it unique? Yes. And whenever you do that, you have people that absolutely love it, adore it, and are like, oh my God, this is brilliant. It's so subversive. And then you have people on the other side that are going, yeah, I kind of miss it when it was just kind of a zombie film with some social commentary, but not such weird deep cuts. So yeah, I'm just very, very mixed on this film. I really still don't know exactly where I land on it. I haven't rewatched it yet. I don't plan to until right before Bone Temple comes out. As I said, talk to me in a year. Maybe I'll like it a little bit more. Or I could say, yeah, I've decided. Not for me. Coming in at 21 is going to be Tom Savini's 1990 remake of Night of the Living Dead. Now, I have seen this film once before, but I had almost no memory of it. And it just recently got released on this very limited release Steelbook 4K that I was lucky enough to get a hold of, that actually has like the uncut version of the film. So I was really actually excited to check this out again, because I know a number of people who love this movie. I know a couple of people who actually like it more than the original Night of the Living Dead. And what's interesting about this movie is that it is kind of a direct recreation of the first film with very deliberate changes that's supposed to kind of play on your expectations of watching the first film. Like how the brother in the very beginning of the movie is taken out and the first zombie appears, kind of it dissects that scene and kind of surprises you with the arrival of the zombie compared to what you think is going to happen. You have the ending of the movie, of course, that takes a very different turn than the original film. And even certain characters, the way that they're characterized, like Barbara, much more of like a badass final girl in this one than she was in the first film. Of course, it being in color is a massive difference. You also have some very iconic horror actors in here, like Tony Todd playing the character of Ben. You've got Bill Moseley as the brother character in the beginning, a couple other character actors that you'll recognize. And one of the biggest distinct differences is while the original Night of the Living Dead, essentially, while creating the modern iteration of zombies, they're more technically ghouls in that first film. This one, it's absolutely what you expect zombies to be. They're literally flesh-eating undead people. So there's a lot of different elements in this film that, while playing very close to the chest with the legacy of the original, does make it stand out. having Tom Savini, who's this revered special effects artist in the world of horror, be a director was certainly an interesting thing to see how he did. And I thought the movie was fine. You know, to me, this is one of those times where I'm glad the movie exists. I don't think it's one of those weird remakes that's almost shot for shot where it's like, why did you even bother with this? I think it has its merit to exist. But it's also one of those times where if I'm ever in the mood to watch Night of the Living Dead, I'm just going to watch the original. I appreciate and I enjoy some of the sensibilities about what that original film did more than I enjoyed it here. So I just never can see myself being in the mood to check out this remake when I have the original sitting on the shelf right next to it. So that was kind of what I ended up on this one. It's cool. It's worth checking out. It's kind of a forgotten remake. You know, you don't really hear people talk about it. So I do encourage a lot of you, and I imagine there is a lot of you who have not seen it, to seek it out. And you might end up really liking it even more than the original. But for me, revisiting this one, I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, I'm glad I own that for collector's sake. I don't see myself really pulling it off the shelf that often, though. Coming in at number 20 was actually a little bit of a surprise for me that it ended up this low on the list, and that's Zombieland Double Tap. Now, this was a sequel that I saw when it came out in theaters. I remember being a lot more positive on it. And I think I'm still going to be a little bit more positive on it than maybe some other people in the group, but this is a long-awaited sequel. I mean, this was one where we were waiting forever, and it's like, why the hell did we never get a sequel to Zombieland? Like, it was financially successful. It got mostly universal acclaim. Like, it's known as being one of the best modern horror comedies, one of the better zombie movies. Like, great stars that are all still very relevant, doing a lot of great things, only getting bigger. Like, what the fuck is the holdup here? And so by the time you got Zombieland Double Tap, I think the wait in between movies was the biggest thing that was held against it, because you have all these huge expectations, all this hype that you've built up, all this anticipation that you've built up. And this is just a good sequel. It's not phenomenal. It's not as good as the original. It's certainly not better than the original. And so if we had gotten Zombieland Double Tap maybe 2-3 years after the original, I think people would have been a lot more friendly to it. But nonetheless, you have Zombieland Double Tap, which brings back all these characters that we love. They're, I think, like 10 years older as far as the timeline of the movie. It might even been 10 years between the movies. Was it? Yeah, it was. Okay, it was 10 years between the movies. So, god damn, that was a long wait. So yeah, 10 years later, 10 years deeper in their relationship, 10 years in an advanced zombie land where they're living in a wasteland. And the movie kind of has this story where one of them, Little Rock, kind of goes off. She's matured now. She wants to kind of find her own way, get a boyfriend or whatever. And the theme of the movie is kind of about family. The first one was about finding a family. The second one was about keeping the family together in a lot of ways. You have Jesse Eisenberg, who proposes, and whatever the fuck that means in the zombie apocalypse, to Emma Stone. She kind of freaks out. You've got Woody Harrelson that's kind of taking more of a softer father-like approach to especially Little Rock, where he's like the hard-edged guy in the first film. And so when Little Rock kind of disappears, it's essentially a road trip movie of them trying to reunite with her, make sure that she's safe. And they kind of encounter a couple of different zany characters along the way. Rosario Dawson was a great introduction here as somebody that is kind of barrowed into this Elvis hotel. You got Luke Wilson and this other guy who comes in, who are very clearly supposed to be like a more annoying version of Jesse Eisenberg and Woody Harrelson. So there's some good gags in the movie. I think the gore is well done. The way that they advance the infected, not really unique, but I like the way that they keep that Zombieland style and they give them different names like Homers and T-800s. All the Terminator references were really fun. The problem with the film is that I think the vast majority of its bits and its jokes and its charm is just kind of relying on remembering the first film and pointing to the first film and saying, hey, remember the rules and that gag and that moment with Bill Murray in the first film? We're just going to reference that stuff. And that's always kind of the most disappointing version of a sequel, especially one that you waited 10 years for, is like, we don't have any new ideas. Let's just remind you of the original ideas. So I think the movie's fine. I have a good enough time with it. I'm not going to rewatch it every single time that I rewatch Zombieland. So yeah, it's one that I think is just okay right here towards the middle of this list. Number 19, we got Planet Terror. This is one half of the Grindhouse movie project that came out in the 2000s, where you had Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino teaming up again like they did with From Dusk Till Dawn, and doing a double feature where Quentin Tarantino had the second half, the film that was titled Death Proof, which is kind of like widely accepted as easily the worst Quentin Tarantino film, to the point where he is like almost distanced himself from it. it, which is odd to me. I really enjoy Death Proof. It's not my least favorite Quentin Tarantino film. But Planet Terror was the first half, which is directed by Robert Rodriguez. And this one is just like a balls out, campy, almost D-level movie with just crazy zombie apocalypse shit. The best thing about this movie is the cast. I mean, you got Rose McGowan, you've got Michael Biehn, you got Bruce Willis. God bless Bruce Willis. I hope he's doing okay. But Josh Brolin even is in this movie. You have this biochemical outbreak, and you're following this, titty dancer, Cherry Darling, as she is battling with some friends to survive like this zombie apocalypse. And she ends up getting like a machine gun to replace her leg that she lost. So there's a lot of zany shit where she's like launching missiles from, like a splits position and everything. It is an absolute balls out action comedy. It's a lot of fun. But I've never been as crazy about Planet Terror as I have been Death Proof. It's kind of a weird dichotomy in that Grindhouse movie. Like, Grindhouse as a title promises a certain style of film. And I feel like Planet Terror really embraces like almost the visual expectation of a Grindhouse film, where it's just like a bunch of weird fucking out there ideas, almost like the Toxic Avenger movies. Whereas Death Proof kind of delivers more of a story and a weird subversive set of characters that you would expect from that type of Grindhouse film. So it's a very interesting double feature. But yeah, this is one that I always have fun with, but anytime I'm in the mood for a Grindhouse film, this is usually not the one that I pick. And I think that while it's a lot of fun, and while there's a lot of just zany, ridiculous things, and, even having like the missing reels and the visual style of trying to kind of embrace that Grindhouse aesthetic that I really enjoyed this experiment for. It's one of those movies that's just so out there that it's almost like I like it better in small doses. I like watching like clips of it more than I like revisiting the entire movie, if that makes any sense. Like once every 10 years, I'm in the mood to check out this movie, and then I'm good for about another decade. Coming at number 18 is World War Z, and this is such a weird anomaly of a movie. Like, I remember all of the tabloids, and I don't even know if controversy is the right word, but like all the low expectations and all of the dirt that was surrounding the production of this movie, more than I remember the movie itself. Like, this was a film that was this massive budget film with a huge A-list star of Brad Pitt, and it was widely advertised through the tabloids that they were going through massive amounts of reshoots, and essentially like the entire damn film was rebuilt from the ground up. And so everything you heard about this thing before release led you to think that this was going to be an absolute box office disaster. And then it comes out and becomes one of the highest grossing horror films of all time. I think currently it's number 4. And then going even further, when a film has a massive success like that and totally sets up sequels, not just one, sequels, an entire like cinematic universe, if you will. You can even do a fucking mini series based off of World War Z. And they've never gone back to that well. So, and World War Z is weird. This is one that I think there's a lot of interesting appeal if you like more action-centric horror films. This is one that I would compare a lot to like the Steven Spielberg War of the Worlds as far as the tonal shifts, where, replace the sci-fi in that with just a straight up horror in this one. And it's kind of the same mix where you have an A-list star and they're going through this journey and they go to certain places, and whether it's aliens or zombies, chaos happens and then they move to another setting. And that's kind of the experience you have here, where Brad Pitt and family are in the middle of the streets, zombie outbreak starts, they escape. They go to a grocery store, chaos erupts, they escape. They end up in an airplane, zombies show up, he escapes. They go to a foreign country, zombies climb over the wall, he escapes. They go to a hospital, you get what I'm saying. And so story-wise, I've never been that enamored with the film. But I think that there's some fun entertainment to be had here. I think it's certainly one of the more like high concept, certainly big budget style zombie films. I mean, you had the fast zombies that I'm personally more of a fan of than the slow zombies here. And this one took it a step further with them being able to like literally be like ants and like mound themselves over gigantic walls and like literally climb buildings and shit, which is pretty terrifying. When you think that heights can save you and they absolutely cannot, that's really cool. I think Brad Pitt is really good in the film. I think there's some pretty solid action and tension. It does stick to a lot of the traditional rules of zombie movies. And so the journey that you go on through the film, which kind of ties into my lackluster experience with the story, doesn't really stand out much. Chopping off an arm to try to stop the infection before it spreads, trying to find a cure being the main plot point of the film. So It's one that I think doesn't have enough to make it stand out for being such a massive success, but it's entertaining enough. You know, it's one of those films that feels comfortable right here in the middle of the list, where it's like a really well done version of a pretty average zombie story that really doesn't carve any new paths. Oh, fuck. Oh, this is not good. Oh. If I have a fever, joint pain, and some kind of discharge, what might be the cause of that?
The symptoms that you have listed are common with gonorrhea.
Hey, Rudy, I need to know what medication you use. Coming in at number 17, we have Overlord. And this is a movie that I've actually found to be kind of a little bit of a hidden gem. You know, this is one that not too many people talk about. And I think Uncle Sean might have brought this one up whenever we decided on the theme. This is one that came out a number of years ago. I do have a review of it on my channel. And it's basically the Nazi zombie movie. You know, of the two more action-centric zombie movies that we're talking about here in the middle, I do think this one is the better one. I think it stands out a little bit more. This is what actually introduced me to Wyatt Russell being Kurt Russell's son. Like, I had seen him, I think, in that Linklater movie and a few other things. And there was just moments in this movie where I was like, this guy's kind of got like a light Kurt Russell vibe, and then put two and two together with his last name. So I actually think this is one of the better things that Wyatt Russell has done. I think that the World War II aesthetic to it is really cool. Having Nazi zombies, I mean, if there's one way to make zombies more despicable as something that you wanted to just see get rained down, it's to put fucking swastikas all over the place. So that works. And it almost has kind of a Resident Evil video game vibe to it, but, you know, done better than the vast majority of the Resident Evil movies. So this is one that I think is fun. It's never really stuck with me. It's not one, as I said, I kind of forgot that it existed until I think Uncle Sean brought it up. So there are certain things about it that I think could have made more of an impact. But as far as a period piece, as far as an action horror film, as far as something that's definitely blending together a lot of different genres, you know, war film, horror film, and then that Nazi zombie like Call of Duty type of aesthetic that was super popular for a long time, especially when this came out, I think it stands out as something that should get a little bit more credit than it does. So, you know, it's in the middle of my list. It doesn't have the iconic nature that a lot of the ones above it has, but it's a really solid, fun entry.
Think on it, bro. They're not just zombies. They're Nazi zombies. Nazi zombies.
Coming in at number 16, we got a Wes Craven film called The Serpent and the Rainbow. And this one's one of those kind of weird entries because this is going with more of the original iteration of what zombies were, kind of the product of voodoo before George A. Romero literally changed the pop culture consciousness to now look at zombies as these flesh-eating undead. So this one's kind of a unique one in this spot. And it's a very kind of love or hate movie. Like, you hear some people talk about it like it's one of Wes Craven's lesser works. You have other people that think it's one of his best one. It's literally the song that inspired Godsmack, for those of you, 2000s heavy metal fans, to do the song Voodoo. It's the reason why they made that song, and it was the reason that I heard about this movie back in the day because I was a big Godsmack fan. And I've always thought it was a pretty cool story. You got Bill Pullman, who's this doctor, and I believe he gets sent out to Haiti because there have been reports of these zombies, these people who were dead, and then this like medicinal powder reanimated them and brought them back to life. So it's kind of an investigation movie where he's invading this cult and trying to figure out the validity of all this. Is it something that's real? Is it some kind of a big hoax out there? And I think that the main villain in this film is actually pretty creepy. The biggest issue that I have with the movie is I feel like it should have ended 15 minutes sooner. You know, there's a spot in this movie, it's one of the more iconic scenes that's literally on the poster of the movie, where you have Bill Pullman, who has been hit with this, voodoo dust, this zombie dust, and it starts to shut down his body. So he's running through town with this cross painted on his head saying like, hey, don't let them bury me, I'm not dead. And that's where the movie should have ended. It could have had like a vanishing type effect there. But it goes on for another 10 minutes. It gets super CGI'd, or I guess, more optical effects back in that day, where you have, a lot of different things floating around, and it gets super fantastical, and he of course vanquishes the evil, and it's still a really solid movie. You know, it's one of my favorite Wes Craven films, honestly, but I wish that it was a movie that kind of stuck to more that darker ending. It would have had a little bit more of a hit to it, but I think this is a really cool hidden gem. You know, people talk about Wes Craven, they think about Scream, they think about Nightmare on Elm Street. There's a number of other of his more kind of deeper cuts that'll get brought up long before this one, but this is the one that I think has some of the cooler style about it. And so it's one that I've always enjoyed revisiting, and for a zombie movie, it is certainly unique because it embraces the voodoo side of things, not the undead side of things. Coming in at number 15, and here we start the pitchforks. They're coming to get you, Cody. Night of the Living Dead, the one that essentially started it all. The original George A. Romero zombie film that spawned the vast majority of this list, inspired the vast majority of this list. This is one of those films that fits into that conversation of a movie that I respect a bit more than I actually enjoy it. Now, some of that is just simply because of the age that I was and the era that I watched it for the first time. This was a movie that I think I watched it for the first time like maybe 6 or 7 years ago. You know, fun fact, I'm not the biggest zombie fan in the world, so why the fuck did I choose this theme? I don't know. I guess I'm a masochist. But Night of the Living Dead is one that, you know, it's a black and white film from the 60s. As I've said a couple of times now, this was the movie that came out that changed the zombie literally spawned the zombie subgenre, but changed what popular culture looked at as zombies forever. And I think that there's a lot of things about this original movie and how small scale and simple of a story it is that I can appreciate. And I think there's a nice creepy vibe about it. It's a movie that plays great around this time of the year, especially. A lot of iconic moments like They're Coming to Get You, Barbara, and of course the ending of the movie. There is some social commentary in here about society that I think is, you know, not nearly as strong of an element as The Crazies, but it's there. It's also known very much for, I don't know if I'd say controversy or not, but you know, the fact that George A. Romero cast a black man to play the lead in the movie, and then paired with how the movie ends, it feels like it's making a statement on society at that time. So it's also known for that. And for a 60s film, even though it's not like a gory movie, the scenes where these ghouls are chewing down on bones and, you know, what's perceived to be flesh, it was very shocking for the time. So it's a movie that I can easily get myself into the headspace of watching this movie back whenever it was first released and really getting into it. But I also am at a major disadvantage when I first watched it and when I continue to rewatch it, because I have grown up experiencing all of the movies, video games, and TV shows that were inspired by this movie and have expanded the concept beyond belief. And so when you go back to Night of the Living Dead, it's such a small, simple, basic version of that it kind of fails to stand out a bit to me when I watch it. You know, when you grow up with the Resident Evil games and The Walking Dead and the Dawn of the Dead remake and things, this original movie is just not anywhere near as exciting or as flashy or as inherently entertaining for my taste. So every time I rewatch it, I kind of feel like it's almost like a homework assignment. It's like film school. You know, it's like watching Citizen Kane or Casablanca. It's like, man, I can really appreciate this, but it's just not one of my favorites. Number 14, we've got Return of the Living Dead. And this is a movie that when I first watched it, it would have been significantly lower on this list. It was a movie that was wildly hyped by a couple of friends of mine. I watched it, didn't quite get it. Luckily, I had a really cool experience last year at Gathering of the Ghouls in Arizona, where I was able to actually watch this film with the majority of the cast. You had Miguel Nunez, you had Tom Matthews there, of course you had Linnea Quigley, even the guy that played Tarman, and so it was a really cool experience to be able to kind of open the movie up with them, as well as Joe Bob Briggs kind of doing his whole shtick to introduce the film, watch it in this little tiny theater in this convention center with a bunch of rowdy fans of the movie, and then watch the Q&A after. It's literally the coolest way that you could watch this movie. And so that one experience actually jumped this movie up quite a bit. I was able to get into it much more. But this is also one of those movies that I think the story surrounding it is equally as interesting as the movie itself. So for those that don't know, this is a movie that's made by Dan O'Bannon, who was originally the guy that worked with George A. Romero on Night of the Living Dead. And they eventually had a falling out. They parted ways, and there was a legal battle. And so Dan O'Bannon, the compromise they came to is that he is able to go on and make pseudo non-official sequels to Night of the Living Dead, and he's able to retain the Living Dead side of the name, where Romero was able to make direct sequels to Night of the Living Dead, but that's why every film after that were just simply of the Dead and don't have living in there. So Return of the Living Dead was like Dan O'Bannon's follow-up to Night of the Living Dead after this major fallout with George A. Romero. And it's a wildly different movie than anything that Romero has done. It's a lot more inherently comedic. It's a very like punk rock type movie where they're going for that type of aesthetic. You literally have like these punks in this graveyard, you know, the infamous scene with Linnea Quigley dancing completely nude on the gravestone. 'Cause I'm a punk rocker, yes I am. A lot of really fun characters. You've got Tom Matthews in scenes where he literally has to act like he is just in agonizing pain for the entire film. It had to be an exhausting shoot for him. And believe it or not, this is actually the movie that first introduced the concept of zombies eating and wanting brains. That all started here, you know, with that famous line from Tarman, brains. I think there's great makeup effects in this movie, especially with Tarman. I mean, he's remained one of the more iconic zombie designs. I think that the soundtrack is great. I think it's a movie that if you're on board for the style of comedy that it's going for, it's a fun little ride. And, you know, it didn't necessarily spawn the best or the most consistent little trilogy here, but they had potential to do some really cool things if they had continued on this in a little bit more of a direct way. But for being kind of a counter-programming to the more social commentary and a little bit more serious angle that George A. Romero went, I think this one exists in a nice little realm for those that want their zombie films to be a little bit more goofy and fun. So not one of my favorites, you know, it's sitting here at 14, but a movie that I totally appreciate, had a great time with it, revisiting it with the cast, of course, and revisiting it here for this list. So when I'm in the mood for a zombie horror comedy, and I feel like I've watched Zombieland a little bit too much, I'll absolutely yank this one off the shelf.
And start biting.
Coming in at number 13, we got Train to Busan. Now, of all of the movies that are really going for that action-centric, super fast zombies, this is one that I think are one of the better ones that we have gotten. This is one of the, certainly the most celebrated zombie films in recent years. Anytime people talk about like modern zombie classics, you always hear this movie being brought up. I was very late to the party on it. I only watched it for the first time a couple of years ago. And I really enjoyed it. You know, this is a South Korean film where essentially you have a group of characters, our central characters being a father and his young daughter on this train to Busan, and a zombie apocalypse breaks out around them and threatens their lives as they're on the way to this destination. And what I love about it is it's such a visceral, intense movie. Like action-wise and horror-wise, it quite literally goes for the throat. The gore is great. As I've said, I prefer the fast zombies. I think they're way scarier for my own personal taste. And what makes this movie stand out so much, and kind of the reason why it's not a movie that I revisit near as much, is it is such an emotional film, especially with the end. It's one of the more heartbreaking finales to a horror film ever, especially if you're a father like me. Like, just the image of this man turning into a zombie with a smile on his face, knowing that he's secured his daughter's fate, but he will never get to, you know, live on with her. Like, even just describing that now, I'm starting to feel the water, and I'm starting to feel the little bit of choking up coming up. Like, we need to stop. We need to stop and move on to number 12.
I'm not crying. You're crying.
Coming in at number 12, another movie that I suspect is going to be a bit of a hot take, and that is 28 Weeks Later. This is actually the first movie in the 28 Days Later franchise that I watched. I didn't have any interest in 28 Days Later when it first came out. You know, it came out around the same time that Blair Witch and things like that were really the rage, and everybody was talking about the found footage genre all the time after Blair Witch, and this felt like it was going to be found footage from the advertisements. Of course, we all know that it wasn't, so that was me just being a dumb kid. But I was like, you know, not a big zombie guy, certainly not a found footage guy. I don't need to see that one. And then 28 Weeks Later, when they were advertising it, very clearly was like a traditional horror film from the advertisements. So I actually, when I first moved to Savannah as a teenager, one of the things that I would do, because I didn't know anybody during the summertime, was I would ride with my mom to work. And while she worked, she would drop me off at the mall. And I would spend all day going back and forth, which are literally across the street from each other in Savannah, or at least used to be. And I would go and watch movies all day and then hang out at the food court, go to the arcade and stuff. It was awesome. And so I literally did a double feature this day of 28 Weeks Later and Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. But 28 Weeks Later blew me away. I did not expect to really like the movie. It was just kind of like, all right, well, this is what's out. So I'll go check it out. I think the opening sequence of this film is one of the greatest openings to any horror film ever. This was one of the movies that just really solidified how much I love the faster version of Infected. Got to step on my words very carefully here. I loved Jeremy Renner, who was kind of a newcomer when this movie came out. Thought his character was great, and even some of the kids like Imogen Poots, who's done a number of things since then. Rose Byrne as well. And I liked this movie's story of having this husband that, you know, has a very cowardly, weak moment that literally comes back to bite him in the ass. And just the tragedy involved with all of that. And the scene where he kisses his wife and then starts to turn and like the eye gouge and stuff. It was like, holy shit. Like, it was one of the gnarliest things that I had ever seen up to that point. And I really like the story of having this city of containment that has been breached and having a group of survivors trying to escape while the government is doing like this very brutal lockdown similar to The Crazies. I think it's a highly underrated sequel. I understand completely why people think it's severely inferior to 28 Days Later. Clearly, I have not mentioned that film yet, so I agree that it's inferior. But I think it is a damn good sequel that doesn't get the love and the respect that it deserves. And too many people act like it's just a far cry, like an absolute dog shit sequel to the original. And I'll just never understand that mindset. I think it's solid as fuck. And, you know, it's one of my more cherished horror movie theater experiences. Coming in at number 11, we're going back to King Romero, and we're at Day of the Dead. Now, this is one that I actually was very surprised how much I liked it when I first watched it. And every time I revisit it, I'm like, yeah, this one's solid as fuck. You know, it tends to be, I think, a little bit more of the popular opinion that this is the weakest of the three. At least that's what I've seen. And, you know, clearly I don't agree with that. But what I like about Day of the Dead is I just like the style, the look, and the vibe of this movie. This is the first one that exists in the 80s, and you can tell it's got a little bit more of that 80s era, you know, borderline MTV attitude to it, which I like, without going too overtly, you know, 80s cheese. And I like the soundtrack and the score of this film very much. I think that the special effects, the gore effects in this movie might be Tom Savini's best work, which is a tall order. I mean, literally the most celebrated special effects guy, arguably of all time in the horror space. I think the gore effects in the third act of this film are fucking incredible. Like, when you see these asshole soldiers getting torn apart, getting disemboweled, having their eyes torn out, having roads ripped limb from limb, like, it is an absolute carnage candy feast. I fucking love it. I also really like the concept here of, you know, having this doctor, Dr. Frankenstein, that has, you know, quietly given up on the prospect of defeating the zombie apocalypse and is more so trying to figure out a way for humans and zombies to coexist. I think that's really unique. It's not an angle that you really see, certainly before, but even after this movie came out, explored very much. And so I like that whole angle with the zombie bub, where he's trying to teach him certain tasks like listening to music and, you know, answering the phone, and he rewards him with human flesh, unbeknownst to everybody else. I think that's really a cool concept, and Bub is a very fun character, one of the more iconic zombies. The spot where he chases down Rhodes for killing Frankenstein, like out of the sense of vengeance, is actually kind of like a sympathetic moment, and then you get the great little salute thing, which is a good little subtle fuck you to Rhodes, which is awesome. Where the movie is a little weak for me, and again, I think it's just a common problem that I have with all of Romero's films. I don't really think that the acting and the writing for the characters is all that great. And some of it is just the fact that I think Romero tends to ham it up quite a bit. You know, all the villains in this movie are absolute cartoon characters. And some people probably love it for that. I think that there's moments where I like it. Other times it's kind of grating on my nerves. Rhodes is always screaming and yelling. The two little sidekicks, his cronies, are literally like the goofy sidekicks that you find in like Rocky and Bullwinkle and shit like that, where they're just like, and then you got weird characters like, you know, the guy that has like this weird crisis of faith and just doesn't listen to anybody, and he's attacking the zombies, and then he just sacrifices himself. I don't know. I can never quite figure out what's going on with that guy either. So character wise, not the strongest movie for me, nor is, you know, any of Romero's films, but style wise, the vibe of it, and certainly the gore effects goes a long way for me. this is a really fun one for me to revisit. And now we have reached the top 10, and I don't know if this is going to be a hot take or not, but we're going to be kicking off the top 10 with our last entry from Romero, and that is Dawn of the Dead. This is a film that, again, like a number of these, I was pretty late to the party on. I saw the Dawn of the Dead remake years before I saw this original one. I was actually kind of bullied and harassed by a friend of mine, Andrew Becker, to eventually watch this film. Like, he would literally make videos about how ridiculous it is that I haven't seen it. So eventually it was just like, fine, let me check this off the box to shut Andrew up.
I come to find out that Cody Leach hasn't seen Dawn of the fucking Dead! Now, how does that happen?
And first time that I watched it, I was like, I don't know, I'm kind of underwhelmed. And I've seen this film, I think, 3 times since. I think this was the 4th time that I watched it. And what I'll say is that this is the one of the Romero of the Dead films that I enjoy the most, specifically because I think it strikes the best balance of having kind of the dark, gnarly gore effects, again by Tom Savini, with also having a fun vibe, a fun cast, and a setting that leads to a lot of goofy scenarios that isn't too overtly comedic. And, you know, this is another one that people always like to talk about the social commentary about consumerism and stuff. And it's definitely there, but I don't ever find that to be one of the bigger, more prevalent elements of this film. So, you know, going back to what I said about The Crazies, I feel like that's a movie where it's just painted in commentary. This one's like just a tiny little piece of it that always gets heightened way more by fans of the movie than I think is actually there. But it's a set of characters that I think are an interesting group of 4. You got Peter, who's kind of more the level-headed one, the one who's kind of the one that grounds everybody. You've got Fly Girl, who is somebody who's very much like almost our final girl arc, where she starts as kind of this frail and feeble person who is pregnant also and kind of has to grow to be more of this tough as nails character and a survivalist by the end of it. Flyboy, a guy who very much complicated character. You don't always know exactly how you feel about him, and ends up being one of the more iconic zombie images of all time that you see. Almost like the poster child of this movie is the image of Flyboy after the elevators open up. And then, of course, Trooper, who's a guy who just immediately just loses his marbles, and it is kind of fun to just see how reckless he is and how much it pisses everybody off. And another pretty iconic zombie image from this film. I love the mall setting. I love the different moments where they're trying to like systematically try to build some kind of a bunker inside of this mall, and they have to like shut down certain areas. They get inside the little prize car and they build a literal wall to hide the stairwells in case anybody comes in and loots the mall. Eventually you do get a group of bikers that come in and just cause chaos trying to loot people, led by Tom Savini, which is really fun. Got a lot of great gore effects there. Of course, the thing that people always point out, even Tom Savini himself, the makeup job on the zombies doesn't age so well. They look incredibly blue. So it's kind of a charm of the movie while also kind of being something that makes it stand out in slightly a dated way. And something that normally would bug me about this movie, but I actually think has a lot of really goofy charm about it, is the soundtrack and the score. Like, there's this musical note that keeps happening throughout the movie that is such a weird, like, mall elevator music type of vibe that I just think is very interesting. Like, it pops up and tonally it does not work at all with what you're watching, but somehow the fact that it doesn't work makes it work. But yeah, Dawn of the Dead, you know, this is a movie that every time I revisit it, I like it and I appreciate it more. So I think, like a couple of others that I've talked about, has potential to keep rising up this list the more that I rewatch it. And, you know, it's a movie that I do have fun with. It does kind of have that yin and yang a little bit like I do with Night of the Living Dead, where I'm half just appreciating the movie because of its legacy and how influential it was, masked with how much I just enjoy it as a film itself. But I dig it. It's here at number 10, and I gotta love it for bringing us that line of, when there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. Coming in at number 9, we have Reanimator, and this is a film that I have now seen twice, and this is just a wild fucking movie, man. This is one of those like zany horror comedies that just goes for it. It's kind of shocking that the movie was even able to be released compared to some things that we consider to be taboo and too much nowadays. I mean, the most famous scene in this movie is the villain with his severed reanimated head trying to go to Chowtown on Barbara Crampton. So like, yeah, it's got a legacy. But I really love what this movie does. I think that it's a really wild, zany take on zombie movies where you have this crazy scientist, or is he so crazy, of Herbert West, played by the great Jeffrey Combs, And he's this like this med student who is trying to develop this formula to be able to reanimate the dead. And of course, once nefarious people get a hold of this, disastrous results ensue. You got a really great central romance here between Dan, I believe, Dr. Kane, and Barbara Crampton's character. And then you got the professor who's always at odds with Herbert West, who ends up being the main villain and always has like this creepy infatuation with Barbara Crampton that, you know, causes him to go for it. But the practical effects are great. It's got this really unique tone to it where you can never quite take it seriously because of the comedic vibe of it, but also it's kind of gross and kind of out there and very visceral with what is going on. So it's one that every time I revisit it, I'm always kind of like surprised how much they're able to blend such extreme tones and really just go for it, no holds barred, to the point where, I mean, you've literally created one of the most beloved scream queens of all time in Barbara Crampton. Anytime she shows up at a con or a festival that I've been to, she's like the star of the show, and a lot of it's from this movie as well as a few others. And Jeffrey Combs, I mean, he's just like a mainstay of B-movie cinema. You know, every time he shows up, like movies like The Frighteners, total standout. So Reanimator is one of those where I kind of need to finally introduce myself to the sequels. I know there's Bride of Reanimator and Beyond Reanimator. I think one of them might not even be a direct sequel. It's just kind of like titled and it has Jeffrey Combs in it. So let me know down below if I should check those out. Maybe a review series down the line. But this is a movie that, like I said, it leaves an impact, and it's just an absolute blast to watch if you're kind of fucked up in the head. And guilty as charged. Coming in at number 8, we have the remake of The Crazies. And this is a movie that belongs in that category for me of films that I have always really enjoyed and then immediately forget how much I enjoy it the second that I stop watching it. Like, I've always thought this was a great remake, but I never talk about it. I never really bring it up in my favorite remakes conversation. When I got ready to watch it this time, it wasn't like I was jazzed about it. I was like, all right, well, this is the next one on the list. And by the time the credits roll, I'm like, it's a great fucking movie. Like, why don't I talk about this more? Why don't I rewatch this more? You have movies like that? I've got like 10 of them. But what I love about this is that it does what a remake should do. It totally embraces the soul and the legacy of the original. It maintains a lot of what was great and celebrated about the original, but it brings it into modern times and it changes up a little bit of the dynamic of the film, where the first one was much more about the social commentary. This one shaves that down a good bit while it's still very present throughout the film, and just ramps up kind of the intensity. It ramps up these horror action sequences. It has a number of these close encounters type infected or zombie attack scenes that are all really visceral. It makes it a much more character-driven film because you have a much more smaller, tighter cast. And the cast here is phenomenal. I love Timothy Olyphant. Everything that he's in, I think that he's awesome. You got Rodda Mitchell in here, who's always really good. Daniel Panabaker, who I always enjoy, especially in the Friday the 13th remake. You know, you have these small-scale group of characters, so you're able to invest yourself in them much more than I think you were in the original. You're able to actually root for them. When the husband and wife get separated and one of them's pregnant and they think that she's infected because of the fever, like, you're like, holy shit, like, get back to her, dude. And when you get these sequences where they're being attacked, you're invested in your tense because you don't want them to die. They're not these dispensable characters. When you get a death like Daniel Panabaker's in the car wash sequence, you feel it. It's sad. It's a loss. And it's a movie that I just think is incredibly well paced. You know, it kicks off right from the get-go. Like, it starts off at this baseball game. This dude walks out onto the baseball diamond, and he's the first person who's gone a little bit crazy and gets gunned down. And from that moment, I mean, it's a movie that's just off to the races. It just gets wilder and crazier, and the situation gets more and more intense and more grim. So, you know, this is one that I really don't have a whole lot of negatives for it. You know, it's just one that, for a remake of The Crazies in 2010, I think they made as good of a movie as you could expect them to make. And it begs the question why I don't watch it more. I think it's damn good. Coming in at number 7, we have Night of the Creeps. And, you know, this is a film that I've had an interesting relationship with throughout my life. This is one that used to always play on like Cinemax or something. And I would only ever catch the third act. I would only ever turn it on, and it would be at the point where characters are walking around with flamethrowers and they're blasting up, you know, zombies' heads and roasting all the little worms that come out, and, you know, the ending of the movie with Thrill Me and the explosion. I saw the third third act of this film probably about 7 times before I saw a single other frame of the movie. Then eventually got a hold of the Blu-ray, maybe like, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago, whenever it came out from Shout Factory, I believe. Finally was able to watch the whole film. And what a pleasant surprise to find out how much of a total unashamed B-movie this is from start to finish, where you literally open the film with these, I mean, dated as fuck alien designs of these little aliens running in this UFO and then launching the experiment or whatever they call it all the way to Earth. And then you get this black and white segment in the 50s, I believe, that is just totally nostalgic. And then it goes right into the 80s and you get kind of like this 80s frat party, like almost sex comedy vibe until suddenly, you know, zombies and worms and death and a bunch of desecration starts to happen in the second half of the film. It's just such a great time. Like, again, horror comedies, despite having a number of them on this list that I really enjoy, is kind of a tough sell for me because I feel like so many of them either are really good at the horror or really good at the comedy and very rarely find a way to balance them both. This is one that I think just progresses to be like totally goofy B-movie comedy and never loses that, but gets much more overtly horror by the second half of the film. And I love the fact that we get a variation of zombies here, where it's literally these little alien worms that will go into people's bodies and turn them into zombies, and they keep infecting and kind of shooting out to other people, almost like the xenomorphs, like the face huggers. And of course, you have the great Tom Atkins in here, who oftentimes plays the same type of swaggered character, but he's just fucking awesome, man. Like, Tom Atkins walks in and it's like, that's the manliest motherfucker on planet Earth. Like, he is my hero. I want to be like him. And so his character here as this detective is just awesome. So yeah, Night of the Creeps, such a blast, such a great and very faithful 80s version of like a B-movie throwback. I have an amazing time every time I revisit this film. Coming in at number 6, young Cody would never forgive me if I did not place Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island this high on this list. Now, look, I understand it's probably going to be one of those things where it's like, how could you put like an hour-long cartoon over something as beloved and influential as Dawn of the Dead? Look, Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island is one of my all-time favorite animated films. You guys know, you hear me talk about it a lot. I don't really get into animated films too much anymore. I'm like the grumpy old man yelling at a cloud at this point, where some of them are great, some of them are amazing, but I'm just never really excited by them. I never really revisit them, aside from the ones that meant so much to me growing up as a kid. And Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island is one of those. I had the VHS tape for this. I wore it out constantly, and what I've always loved about this is it's kind of like a legacy sequel to the old school original Scooby-Doo cartoon. You know, this is like years after the Mystery Machine gang has broken up, and this is about getting the gang back together and trying to get back to the good old days. And what broke them up initially is the fact that they were just sick of always hunting down these monsters and having it be a dude in a mask. And finally, they get a case where there ain't no dude in a mask. This shit is real. And I just always thought it was so fun for that, to have actual zombies. Eventually you get like these cat werewolf type creatures. It's actually pretty visceral and intense for I believe G-rated type of animated film. I mean, it's not really shying away from literally showing groups of people be massacred by these cat creatures, and the way that they visualize the zombies is very faithful to what zombies look like. I mean, rotting flesh, torn off limbs, all that stuff in a cartoon. I think that it's got a really solid sense of humor, and, you know, I have nostalgia for this one. Nostalgia is a powerful drug. For movies that you grow up with that are very important to you and formative for you, and ones that you revisited and brought you so much joy and comfort as a kid, they always have like this locked little chamber in your heart that even if the movie ages poorly, or even if there's, you know, things about your sensibilities as an adult that make you stray away from it, it's always got a place there. And Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island is one of those movies for me. Added in with the fact that it's got a pretty kick-ass rock and roll soundtrack. Terror time again. Oh my God, dude, it is getting so bad. Oh, I've only got 5 left. I can muscle through it, but no matter what happens to me, you've got to promise me, Sean, those pictures we took with each other, you have to keep those secret. Those cannot reach the public eye ever. What the fuck do you mean you took new ones with Adam? What a whore. Coming in at number 5, the biggest, most pleasant surprise of this entire slate of films, Peter Jackson's Brain Dead, also known in the US as Dead Alive. This is a film that has been on my radar for a couple of decades. This is another one of those movies that I distinctly remember constantly passing the VHS cover in the horror section of Family Video, the woman pulling her lips apart and the skull peeking through it, seeing the title Dead Alive, wondering what the hell that was about, but never got around to checking it out. And then by the time I was old enough to start attaching names to the movies that I love and starting to understand more of filmmakers' filmographies and legacies, you know, people find out that I love The Frighteners, one of my favorite horror comedies of all time, and they go, hey, if you love The Frighteners, you'll fucking love Dead Alive. You need to seek that one out before he got lost in Middle Earth forever. He used to make some pretty wild shit. Unfortunately, by the time I had the interest to check this out, this movie was an absolute pain in the ass to try to find any physical copy of it. There's no mainstream available physical copy of it that's available to purchase to this day. It was only because I was able to find an Italian Blu-ray that at first I didn't even think I was going to be able to watch because it literally is defaulted to Italian, but you go through the settings and you change certain things, and luckily there's a way to watch it in English, but it is a pain in the ass to find. I think there might be a copy of it on YouTube, maybe, but yeah. You'll have to talk to CP's uncle. That might be your best bet to actually see this fucking movie. But nonetheless, this was a movie that I put in during the slate of films that I was watching where I was really reaching some exhaustion. You know, watching just nothing but zombie movies over and over. It's like having the same meal 3 times a day for a week. I was like, okay, enough of the fucking undead. And then I got to this one, and within 10 minutes, I was just perked up like, ooh, the fuck is this weird shit? And oh my God, I absolutely loved this movie. It was such a insane, bonkers, bananas, batshit crazy experience that this is one of my new all-time favorite zombie films instantly. First of all, I love the fact that this is one of those movies that just absolutely goes for it with the zany, off-kilter, kooky tone. You know, it's something that is still present in movies like The Frighteners, but certainly shaved down quite a bit. This is very out there weird. You know, it's a New Zealand film. Maybe New Zealand just has a different sense of humor than the US, but it's a very unique brand of off-kilter. And so the moment that you get introduced to this and you have these, you know, people in like the Amazon somewhere trying to get this rat monkey and immediately having somebody see a little scratch and then just start dismembering this guy out of fear of him being infected, eventually getting introduced to our main characters, and you got this guy who's this little fucking mom-whipped bitch, and it's just such a bizarre film where I was immediately just encapsulated with weirdness in a way that I really enjoyed. It's kind of a slow build at first where, of course, you have this little rat monkey, which is like an absolutely atrocious, like stop motion type effect, but in the best way where like I appreciated how terrible it is aged. It made me laugh out loud. Turns in to bite this guy's mom, and then she becomes like patient zero for this huge zombie outbreak in this little New Zealand town. But where this movie truly shines is if you are a fan and a champion of practical creature effects, practical gore effects, and practical carnage candy, because holy hell, the back half of this film is relentless. Just unfolds at such a breakneck pace where you're going from like one practical effect, one gag, one death, one kill, one body dismemberment after another, like at such a fast pace that just the film nerd in me was just marveling at this. Like, holy shit, this one effect that lasts 3 seconds on screen probably took them a day to set up and to clean up and to reshoot over and over again. And he just immediately goes into another one. Like, Peter Jackson has gone on record by saying this was a very easy shoot, but I have a hard time fathoming that. Like, I just want to watch a behind the scenes documentary of how they made this movie, because the amount of just absolute batshit carnage effects and dismembered bodies and bisected bodies and gigantic rat zombie monsters and, you know, a dude that gets thrown onto a fucking lamp and becomes like a zombie lamp. It's gnarly, it's stomach churning, and yet it is so slapstick goofy that you're just smiling from ear to ear with every successive effect. So this was one where, like, I I can't wait to watch it again. Like, I almost felt like I was underselling it by putting it at number 5, but the fact that it was a first-time watch, I was like, I don't know. Do I love it more than these other movies that I've loved for decades? Maybe. I really hope at some point, like Scream Factory or Arrow or Umbrella or somebody gets a hold of the distribution rights for this film and gives us a proper physical media release of this, because this is one that I imagine a ton of horror fans are completely unfamiliar with or have not had the ability to watch. I'm telling you right now, if you love zombie movies, if you love practical gore effects, seek this bitch out, because wow. When you open up the Bible for special effects gods, you have The Thing, you have American Werewolf in London, and on page 3, you have Brain Dead. Peter Jackson, come back to us, sir. I know you've had fun in Middle Earth. You've had fun playing with King Kong. Like, come back into the trenches with us crazy horror fans. We need you. Coming in at number 4, it's time to nut up or shut up with one of my favorite horror comedies, and that is Zombieland. This was a movie that came out of nowhere for me. As I said, never really been all that enamored with zombies, and a number of the people in this movie I liked, but they weren't like the big stars that they are now. So I remember this being in theaters, and I was like, maybe it's fun. I don't know. Finally watched it on home video, and from the moment that you get the opening credits sequence with For Whom the Bell Tolls by Metallica playing, I was like, oh yeah, sold, totally fucking in. And I just love how this movie has carved out its own distinct style. It embraces the horror and the intensity and the practical gore of the zombie subgenre. It also embraces a lot of the goofy inherent nature to the more comedic versions of the zombie apocalypse, but it does it in a way that is so unique to its own. The fact that it has like these survival rules from the character, Jesse Eisenberg's character, having Woody Harrelson on this relentless hunt for a Twinkie, having Emma Stone and Abigail Breslin as these little con artist sisters that continuously fuck over the other two main characters, the cameo by Bill Murray, absolutely legendary. It's just got such a sharp sense of humor while never really taking the foot off the gas with the horror and with the gnarly nature of the zombie bites and the gore effects and everything, that it just reaches that perfect balance that I said so oftentimes is missing for me, where they embrace the comedy, they embrace the horror, and one of them does not cannibalize the other. And so Zombieland has been one of my most rewatchable zombie films for a very long time. I was one of those people who were like screaming from the rooftops for 10 years saying, where the fuck is the sequel? Got it a little bit too late, but yeah, Zombieland, absolutely one of my favorites. Moving on to number 3, we have 28 Days Later. And this is a film that I have actually grown more and more to love over time. When you first asked me after I saw 28 Weeks Later in theaters, and then eventually after loving that film, decided to finally give 28 Days Later a chance and bought it on DVD, if you'd asked me that day, I would have told you, oh yeah, 28 Days Later is awesome. I wish I would have been more open-minded and watched it when it first came out and everybody was shouting from the rooftops how great it was. But here I am. I'm finally a part of the party, guys. It's really good. But I prefer 28 Weeks Later. That's not the case anymore, obviously. Every time that I rewatch these movies, still love them both, but I find so much more to appreciate in each successive watch of 28 Days Later, where it's such an interesting blend, where you really have this movie that came out and quite literally reinvigorated and kind of redefined the zombie subgenre, which has now been, running rampant for the last 20 years with things like The Walking Dead. Hasn't really slowed down much, and introduced us to, the market that things like the Dawn of the Dead remake and a lot of these other more modern films can survive and be really successful in. That's all thanks to 28 Days Later. Of course, there's that annoying controversy, at least it's annoying for me, where people don't want to consider this a zombie film, and if you call it a zombie film, it's like fucking sacrilege. But like, for all intents and purposes, guys, infected zombies, like, it's still the same type of experience. You have these fucking ferocious humans that have lost their humanity trying to tear apart and eat the living humans. Like, give me a break. But 28 Days Later is a really interesting mix of something that is going for a much more mean and visceral and ferocious version of a zombie or infected film, while very much maintaining like an art house film sensibility. I don't think it's quite as out there weird as the art house sensibilities in 28 Years Later. But with 28 Days, the way that it's shot to be incredibly low res with these, at the time, the state-of-the-art digital cameras, and quickly were obsolete, gives it its own kind of grainy, gritty, realistic vibe to it. The fact that you have a fast zombie here where the infection spreads like that, and just a drop of blood or saliva or whatever, making it into your ocular cavities can turn you into a ravenous monster in like 3 seconds. That really ramps up the intensity, and having a bunch of them crash through the walls. That scene where you have him in the church and it just looks like a bunch of dead bodies and he says hello and 2 of them are like one of the most terrifying moments in any of these films. But then in the second act, it's kind of about finding your family again and trying to hold on to that little bit of the human experience despite that all but being snuffed out. And that scene in the grocery store, and you got that shot where they're in their car going over what looks like almost like an oil painting of a flower garden and stuff. Like these really interesting, deliberate, artistic choices that make 28 Days Later have such a unique DNA. And then a third act that kind of takes somewhat of a trope of the zombie subgenre or the infected subgenre, which are the humans that are left in this apocalyptic world even more evil than these ravenous, mindless monsters. And it does it in a way that's a lot more icky and a lot more emotionally like compromising than a lot of other stories that go for that. Usually it's just about people being power hungry and being murderous. And this one, you have this whole plot of these group of soldiers that want to draw women there to breed. And it's like, it's really fucking uncomfortable when you get there. And you absolutely cheer on Cillian Murphy coming in and almost being like his own version of one of these infected, tearing through all of them. So it's just such a fucking awesome movie that has aged wonderfully, despite the fact that the visuals, the more that they upgrade this from, DVD to Blu-ray, Blu-ray to 4K, and whatever's after that, it looks worse as our technology improves. I love the experience that this movie gives, and it's something that I just appreciate more and more as time goes on. Coming in at number 2 is going to be Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead remake. As far as traditional zombie movies go, this one has been my favorite for a very long time. This is a movie that I remember very distinctly whenever it was coming out, not being like crazy excited for it. And I think it was Spike TV or something. They were advertising, hey, if you watched this program, at the end of it, we're going to show you the first 10 minutes uncut of the new Dawn of the Dead film. And what a brilliant marketing tool for the technology at the time when we used to watch program television, to watch the first 10 minutes of this movie, which is one of the best horror openings of all time, and then have it cut to black and say, you want to see the rest of it? Take your ass to the theater. I'm fucking there, baby. And me and my dad went to go see this, and I just absolutely love the experience that this movie gives. I love the way that they visualize the zombies. I love the fact that they're fast and ferocious and genuinely terrifying in so many different sequences. I love the cast of characters here. It's literally an ensemble film where you have like 7, 8 different core characters, and all of them have something interesting or entertaining about them. All of them play into different personalities and have different kind of chemistry with each other that's really fun. I love the way that the movie progresses with the mall and the horde of zombies that surround the mall, and they start to find ways to like entertain themselves waiting for any form of help, where they're literally playing like some kind of a sick game where they're finding celebrity lookalikes and popping them off with a sniper rifle, and the different difficulties that come along the way with the zombie baby, the daughter having to watch her dad die and then becoming like super overly attached to this dog and putting everybody at risk to save the dog, and having to go downstairs to turn the power back on in that parking garage in a fucking intense sequence, and then just a balls out carnage filled third act where they make like these murder buses and start going out. Like, this thing is just an absolute thrill ride. It's to date still my favorite Zack Snyder film. I really hope we get to this version of Zack Snyder again, where you still get some of those things like the slow motion shots and, him being very much a visual storyteller, but there's just so much awesomeness, intensity, genuinely fun comedy in this film that I think it's a perfect remake of the original Dawn of the Dead. Shaves away some of the social commentary and some of the more goofy elements of that movie and just goes for like this balls out, visceral, intense action horror thrill ride. That's my type of zombie film. So Dawn of the Dead, absolutely one of my favorites, here at number 2. But coming in at number 1 for me is going to be Pet Sematary, a movie that nobody really thinks of immediately when you talk about the zombie subgenre, but it really is a zombie movie, like by every definition. But yeah, as soon as we decided to include Pet Sematary and we realized that it absolutely fit the theme that we were going for, I was like, oh, well, I guess that means my number one is decided because I've always loved this movie. You know, I kind of wish it wasn't my number one. I wish that I could lie and say that Dawn of the Dead was a movie that I loved more than Pet Sematary, because I don't like the feeling that I'm hijacking or exploiting a theme just to be able to talk about one of my favorite movies again.
Hi.
But what has always made Pet Sematary stand out to me is that this is a movie that what makes it memorable, what makes it effective, what makes it a film that never really escapes my head has changed and evolved throughout my lifetime. And I can't really think of any other horror film that has done that. You know, this is a movie that we used to watch a lot on Laserdisc as a kid. It was always one of my dad's favorites. It was always one of mine. And the most memorable part of this was Zelda when I was a kid. And like fucking clockwork, every time we'd watch this movie, we get to Zelda scenes, I'd look over and my dad would be asleep on the couch. You son of a bitch, I'm here alone. And then as I got older, and especially after I had a family of my own and kids of my own, suddenly the movie very much kind of flipped on its head, where Zelda's still creepy as shit, but what really scares the hell out of me about this movie is that inherent concept, that theme of the movie, which is that moral dilemma. If you lose a loved one, are you able to let go of them? Or if you had the ability to bring them back, despite it not really being them, would you be tempted by that? Like, that is fucking terrifying to me. My biggest fear, by a landslide, is outliving my kids. And this movie takes that fear and exploits it in the most grotesque and horrific way possible. And it's because of that that when people ask me that very popular question of what is the scariest movie of all time, this is my honest answer. It's not as overtly scary as, you know, some other things that are more jump out at you type of scary, or something that is a little bit more apocalyptic, or something that has a creepier monster at bay. But the concept and what they're exploring here, which is just the dark side of death and love, that is the most horrific thing that I've ever seen on screen. And this is one of those movies that I always find myself so at odds with other people's experience, where it oftentimes gets called out as being really dated and the acting being terrible and being a movie that's just kind of weird and off, and it just doesn't really have an aesthetic that people really can get into. It doesn't have the same emotional impact as them. And I've just always been puzzled by that. Like, I'm not saying that people deserve Oscars in this movie, but I have always found Dale Midkiff's performance to be really good in this, despite him always being called out as being a bad actor in this film. I don't get that at all. I think that the weird, eerie, jagged edges of this movie and the off-kilter nature and just the very ominous vibe that it has only adds to the experience and the emotions that they're trying to get you to experience with the film. So I'm just on an island with it, I guess. I loved it as a kid. There's plenty of movies that I loved as a kid that don't necessarily hold up as an adult, and they age poorly, and I see all the flaws as, you know, somebody with adult eyes. This is one that I've just never really understood, and I've never had that experience with. To me, this is just as impactful, just as grotesque, just as emotionally devastating as it's ever been. And that's what makes it my number one on this list. One of my favorite movies of all time, one of my favorite horror films for sure, is that horror is supposed to get emotions out of you. Horror is supposed to horrify you. Horror is supposed to give you a taste of this dark side of life that hopefully you don't actually have to experience in the real world. You can just kind of peer into it through fiction and then go back to your daily life. Pet Sematary is one of the most successful films of all time at doing that for me. So as they say, sometimes dead is better. And as I say today, sometimes Pet Sematary is better. Easily my number one of 31 on 31 Outbreak Protocol.
Hey baby, we just got back from trick-or-treating. Cody? You alright? Cody?
Well, that's it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed it this year. If you enjoyed this, want to check out all the other episodes that we've done, here is a playlist of a massive amount of 31 on 31s. Please be sure to check out everybody else's videos down in the video description below and see how our lists differ, and make sure you like, share, and hit that subscribe button so that you don't forget to come back in a couple of weeks for our debrief on this list. Thank you guys for watching. Have a happy Halloween, and as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.